There's a sketchbook sitting somewhere in your apartment right now. The pages are still crisp. The spine hasn't cracked yet. You bought it 6 months ago with genuine excitement, and every time you walk past it, you feel a small, sharp pang of something that feels uncomfortably close to shame. Here's what makes this strange. You wanted this. You chose this. No one forced you to buy expensive watercolors or download that poetry app. Yet the moment you sit down to actually create something, your body responds as if you've triggered a biological alarm system. This isn't about laziness. We need to understand that immediately. What you're experiencing is a sophisticated neural conflict that your brain has been trained to execute for thousands of years. And understanding why you're afraid to make the first brushstroke will change how you relate to every unfinished project gathering dust in your closet. Let's start with the battlefield. Right now, as you think about creating something, two distinct neural networks are preparing for war inside your skull. The first combatant is your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that lives approximately 2 inches behind your forehead. The prefrontal cortex is your executive function headquarters. It's responsible for planning, decision-making, and, critically, social evaluation. It's the part of you that can imagine future consequences. It can simulate how other people might judge you. And it has become extremely, almost obsessively good at one particular job: predicting social threats. Here's where it gets fascinating. When you sit down to draw or write, your prefrontal cortex doesn't see a hobby. It sees a performance that will be evaluated, even if you swear you'll never show anyone. Even if you promise yourself this is just for you, your brain has been so thoroughly conditioned by years of grades, likes, and social comparison that it cannot turn off its evaluation protocols. Every blank page becomes a potential site of failure. Every color choice, every line, every word gets instantly measured against an internal database of what good looks like. Your prefrontal cortex is running continuous threat assessments. Will this make me look unskilled? Will this expose me as a fraud? Will this confirm that I'm not actually creative? Now meet the second combatant, your default mode network. The DMN is a collection of brain regions that activate when you're not focused on the external world. It's the network that lights up during daydreaming, mind-wandering, and, crucially, during moments of genuine creative insight. The default mode network is where your brain makes unexpected connections. It's where metaphors are born, where you suddenly understand why two seemingly unrelated ideas might actually be the same thing. Neuroscientists have discovered that the DMN is essential for creative thinking because it operates below the level of conscious control. But here's the devastating catch. The DMN requires psychological safety to function. It needs what researchers call a low-stakes environment. The moment your prefrontal cortex starts screaming about social evaluation, the default mode network effectively shuts down. It's like trying to have a vulnerable conversation while someone stands behind you with a clipboard, grading your emotional authenticity. This is the war. Your critical, socially anxious prefrontal cortex versus your intuitive, associative default mode network. And in most people, the prefrontal cortex wins before the creative process even begins. You don't fail to create. You fail to start creating because your brain has already decided the risk isn't worth it. Let's talk about why this matters beyond your abandoned sketchbook. There's a category of human experience that language cannot adequately process. Trauma researchers, neuroscientists, and psychologists increasingly understand that certain emotional states exist in what we might call pre-verbal territory. Grief, complex joy, the strange dissonance of loving someone and simultaneously needing distance from them, the specific texture of nostalgia mixed with regret. These states have a neurological signature, but they don't have clean linguistic containers. Words flatten them, simplify them, sometimes miss them entirely. This is where non-verbal creation becomes neurologically essential. When you paint, when you play an instrument, when you move your body through dance, you're giving your brain an alternative processing route. You're allowing the emotional data to move through a system that doesn't require verbal translation. Research on expressive art therapy has shown measurable changes in cortisol levels after just 20 minutes of creative activity. Not because you made something beautiful, not because you solved a problem, but because you gave your nervous system permission to express complexity without defending it, explaining it, or justifying it. The act of creation becomes a form of biological regulation. Your body is literally offloading processed emotional content into external form. The painting doesn't need to be good. The song doesn't need to be finished. The function is the movement itself, the translation of internal state into external gesture. When you move from judging to doing, from critiquing to creating, your brain shifts into what neuroscientists call a flow state. Dopamine increases, the prefrontal cortex quiets, time perception changes, you enter a mode where your sense of self becomes less rigid, less defended, more permeable. This is creativity functioning as it was designed to function, as a private ritual of meaning-making, as a way to digest experiences your verbal mind cannot fully metabolize, as biological necessity, not social performance. But something happened to this private ritual. Somewhere in the last 15 years, we accidentally performed an architectural renovation on human creativity. And we need to be honest about what we demolished in the process. Social media platforms didn't set out to destroy private creative practice. They simply offered a new possibility. What if your sketchbook wasn't just for you? What if your poetry could find an audience? What if your midnight guitar sessions could be shared? The problem isn't sharing. Humans have always shared their creations. The problem is that we optimized for the result and accidentally deleted the process. We turned every creative act into a potential audition. Every sketch became a portfolio piece. Every poem became a brand statement. Pinterest sold us the aesthetic. Instagram sold us the audience. YouTube sold us the possibility of expertise. And in exchange, we handed over the one thing that made creativity psychologically functional: privacy, the permission to be bad, the right to create something meaningless. We have trained an entire generation to ask before they make the first mark, is this shareable? And that question, that single shift in framing, reactivates every social threat detection system in the prefrontal cortex. It transforms play into performance, and performance requires perfection. Children create with abandon because they haven't yet learned to perform. They finger paint because it feels good. They sing because the song is inside them. They haven't developed the neural architecture to imagine judgment while creating. But we learned so well that we can no longer separate the act of creation from the act of evaluation. We cannot draw without simultaneously imagining how the drawing will be perceived. And that split attention, that divided consciousness, is precisely what makes the blank page terrifying. So how do we reclaim this? How do we trick our overtrained prefrontal cortex into letting us play again? We need to make the stakes so low that your brain stops treating creation as a social survival test. The strategy is simple, almost insultingly simple. Create a designated space for creative work that is forbidden from being good. This isn't reverse psychology. This is a direct neurological intervention. You are explicitly removing the performance variable from the equation. Buy a cheap sketchbook. Not the beautiful one with thick paper, the $3 one from the drugstore. Set a timer for 15 minutes. Draw badly. Draw the ugliest, most disproportionate face you can imagine. Give yourself permission to create something you would never, ever show another human being. Write a poem that doesn't make sense. Play 3 notes on an instrument in the wrong order. Sing off key. Dance in a way that looks absolutely ridiculous. The point isn't the output. The point is retraining your default mode network to activate without fear. You're building a new neural pathway. You're teaching your brain that creation doesn't always lead to evaluation, that sometimes The act itself is the entire point, that there's a category of making that exists purely for internal regulation, not external validation. After 2 weeks of this practice, something interesting happens. The prefrontal cortex starts to relax. It realizes this isn't actually a threat. There's no audience, there's no judgment, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, your default mode network begins to trust the process again. You might notice that your bad drawings start to have unexpected moments of honesty. Your meaningless poems might accidentally say something true, not because you got better, but because you got safer. And safety is the soil in which creativity actually grows. This doesn't mean you never share your work. This doesn't mean you abandon craft or skill development. It means you protect the source. You maintain a private practice that exists solely for you, where the only measure of success is whether you showed up. You're allowed to have both: a public portfolio and a private playground, a polished Instagram and an ugly sketchbook, a published poem and a journal full of nonsense. The mistake was thinking they had to be the same thing. Because here's what we're actually talking about. Creativity isn't a talent you either have or don't have. It's not a gift reserved for artists and musicians and writers. It's a biological function. It's how your brain processes complexity. It's how your nervous system regulates itself. It's how you make sense of experiences that language cannot hold. When you deny yourself access to creative expression because you're afraid of being bad, you're not just avoiding a hobby. You're blocking a fundamental processing route. You're forcing your brain to metabolize complex emotional data using only verbal logical pathways. And those pathways weren't designed to carry everything you feel. All those unstarted projects aren't evidence of laziness. They're evidence of a nervous system that desperately wants to create but has been taught that creation requires permission. Permission from an audience, permission from a standard, permission from a version of good enough that keeps moving further away. You don't need permission. You need privacy. You need a space where the only rule is that there are no rules. Where bad is not just allowed, but expected. Where the point is the doing, not the done. So here's what we're asking you to do. Create something meaningless today. Draw something ugly. Write something that makes no sense. Sing a song no one will ever hear. Not because it will become something beautiful later. Not because it's practice for real work. But because your brain needs it. Because your nervous system is asking for it. Because creation, at its core, is an act of self-respect. Which brings us to you. Right now, at this exact moment, we have one question and we want you to sit with it, not answer it immediately. What would you create if you knew no one, not even yourself, was allowed to judge it? If this resonated with you, if you felt something shift in how you think about your own abandoned projects, consider joining us here at Reason Unfolded. We'll see you in the next unfolding.